What happens when a mechanic without rank repairs a system that officers haven't even inspected? The command tried to erase him from the reports, but what happened next was remembered by the entire ship. You ever seen a man do the right thing and get punished for it? No? Then you haven't seen the Navy up close. They called it the Big E USS Enterprise. She looked like a giant rusted skeleton just dragged out of hell with half her ribs showing. Burn marks across her deck, holes punched in her sides like someone took a can opener to her hull. She wasn't pretty, but she was still breathing. Just barely. I stood at the bottom of that floating wreck, one boot in oil, one boot in seawater, holding a wrench that weighed more than some of the boys they let run things. The morning sun was cruel, slicing straight through the metal scaffold and blinding half the crew. Sparks flew from welders, steam hissed from busted pipes, and somebody somewhere was shouting for a clipboard they lost 3 days ago. Me. I was just trying to keep her alive. I wasn't supposed to be there. Hell, I wasn't supposed to matter. Black man, second class, petty officer, mechanical division. You think they trained us to fix ships like the Enterprise? No. They trained us to carry grease buckets, mop decks, and stay in line. But I knew systems. Cooling valves, steam loops, catapult hydraulics. I studied that mess at night while the rest of them played cards and smoked through the ration packs. That morning, I found the problem. The launch catapult's secondary coolant line corroded bad. If they'd fired it under full load, it would have blown, sent an aircraft and its crew straight off the bow into the Pacific. That wasn't a guess. That was a fact. And I told them. Politely at first. "Sir," I said to Lieutenant Grant, tall, pale, clipboard tucked under one arm like it held divine orders. "This pipe here's compromised. You fire that catapult, she's gonna rupture." He didn't even look, just kept writing. "That your job now, Mills? Evaluating engineering systems?" "No, sir," I said, "but it's my job to keep sailors alive." That got a pause. Not a long one, just long enough for him to sneer. "You people always think you're smarter than the manual." I knew what he meant by you people. I'd heard it since boot. And every time I ignored it, hoping maybe one of them would prove they were better than that. They never did. But that day, I didn't ignore it. "I don't care about the manual," I said. "I care about pressure blowback and metal fatigue. I care about this crew." He waved me off. "You'll care about court-martial if you keep stepping out of line." So I did what every regulation told me not to do. I fixed it anyway. Waited till they left for lunch, slipped under the safety chain, and went elbow-deep into rust and salt water. Rebuilt the valve loop, flushed the coolant, welded a temporary brace on the cracked bracket. Took me just under 2 hours. Burned through one pair of gloves, a sleeve, and about half the patience I had left with this Navy. When they found out, let's just say Grant wasn't clapping. They pulled me into command the next morning. 3 officers behind a table, all in pressed whites. One of them had a silver mustache so stiff it looked starched. "Mills explained to us," the senior officer said, "why you disobeyed direct orders and modified a critical launch system without authorization." I said, "Because it was broken." "You are not authorized to make that determination." "With respect, sir, I made that determination because no one else would." Silence. Long silence. Then came the papers. Temporary suspension, stripped of mechanic duties, reassigned to supply hold C, inventory work. They called it procedural review. I called it what it was, A quiet punishment. A warning to anyone else who thought doing the right thing mattered more than following the chain of command. Down in Hold C, it was dark, damp, and smelled like wet rope and spoiled meat. I spent 10 hours a day counting crates, stacking gear, and pretending I hadn't just been benched for saving lives. Nobody talked to me. Not really. The white boys stared. The black ones looked away. Not out of shame, out of fear. They knew what happened to men like me. You push too hard, speak too loud, think too much, and the Navy finds a way to quiet you. But let me tell you something. I wasn't quiet. Not in my head, because I knew I was right. And that was the part they couldn't stand. It wasn't the valve. It wasn't the chain of command. It was the fact that I, a black man with dirt under his nails and brains in his skull, made the call they should have made first. And I made it alone. Later that week, I heard whispers. Grant talking to one of the officers, words like insubordinate, unreliable, risk to unit cohesion. You'd think I'd tried to sink the ship. All I did was fix the damn pipe. But that's how it was. You could be twice as good and still get written up for doing more than your job. And just when I thought they'd buried me for good, something happened. Something I didn't see coming. But that's for the next part. What happened next changed everything. You're not going to want to miss how this unfolds. The Navy has a special way of making you disappear, without laying a finger on you. They just move you, bury you under crates, clipboards, and temporary reassignment. That's how I went from saving one of the most important ships in the Pacific to counting dried beans and listening to wet cardboard peel off bulkheads in Hold C. Every morning at 0600, the whistle blew like it meant something. But to me, it was just another reminder. You stepped out of line, Mills. Now stay quiet. I had a new boss now, Chief Purser Reynolds. Man looked like he hadn't smiled since Hoover was in office. He gave orders like reading from a script. Crates 7A through 10C need inventory. Double-check all dates on medical supplies. And then, my personal favorite. Let's not have any incidents, Mills. See, Reynolds didn't have to say what he meant. He wore it on his face, that tight-lipped, bureaucratic concern that came whenever a black man made too much noise by doing the right thing. And yet, I showed up. Every day. Did the job. Stacked, lifted, recorded, sealed. It wasn't the work that bothered me. It was the silence. Not the quiet of the hold. The silence from the rest of the ship. I walked the corridors and suddenly nobody saw me. Men I used to share coffee with, eyes down, the ones who asked me to look at engine valves, pretending they never knew I existed. The Navy didn't throw you in a cell for thinking too hard. No, they froze you out. Made sure the air got thinner every time you stepped into a room. But that kind of quiet, it only sharpened my hearing. On the third day, I caught wind of something strange. One of the junior techs, Wilkins, was whispering in the mess about a delegation coming. Said some brass from Naval Intelligence and a few Japanese-speaking officers were boarding the Enterprise. They were here to observe. That was the word he used, observe. Now, you don't bring in translators to observe a ship that's supposed to be back in action. You bring them in when you expect something unusual. I made a note of it. Not on paper, just in the back of my head where they couldn't erase it. Later that day, Chief Reynolds came down holding a folder like it held gold. He didn't speak at first, just looked at me, then pointed to a stack of crates in the far corner. "Special inventory," he said. Keep your nose down. Don't speak to anyone about it." "Sure." I opened them after he left. Carefully, no breaking seals, just a peek. Inside, blueprints, not standard ship specs. These were cross-sections of the Enterprise's launch system, full schematics, detailed, labeled in 2 languages, English and Japanese. I closed that crate slower than I'd opened it, took a long breath. Then I understood. Somebody, somewhere, was preparing to show this ship, my ship, to folks who weren't supposed to be seeing it. Not enemy spies. That would have been too simple. No, this was worse. This was sanctioned. This was paperwork deep, flag-wrapped, top-down approved. I tried asking around. Subtle at first. A question here, a comment there, but all I got back were stiff nods and shut doors. Except for one person. Davis. Harold Davis. Fellow mechanic. Quiet, smart, light-skinned brother who passed for just another sailor in most rooms, which gave him ears in places I didn't have. He found me in the lower corridor one night. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. "I saw enough." He didn't blink. "They're walking the Japanese around the ship tomorrow. Rear section first, catapult bay by noon." I stared. Why the hell would they show them that system? Davis leaned in. "Because they're not from Tokyo. Not anymore. They're Nisei, interned in 42. Now they're in uniform, our uniform, and Naval Intelligence wants them to report on potential weaknesses." I paused. That was a different kind of weight. These men, sons of immigrants, were being used to translate technical breakdowns on American ships to help American intelligence prepare for Japanese tactics. Not to betray us, to protect us. But nobody had told the crew, and nobody was explaining why my fix, the one they reprimanded me for, was now the center of an intelligence tour. "So they're calling it security review," I said. Davis just nodded. "They're saying it was your unauthorized repair that triggered it, that the brass wants to understand the thinking process behind it." I laughed, dry and bitter. "So now I'm not dangerous. I'm interesting." We didn't talk long. Talking was dangerous. But I remember walking back to my bunk thinking, so this is the reward for doing your job too well. You get made into a case study. The next morning it got worse. I was called up, not to clean, not to stack boxes, but to stand by in the catapult bay while the review happened, like a damn prop. They didn't want me to speak, just be visible, look cooperative. So I stood there in the shadow of a system I fixed, next to the same officers who tried to bury me, while they nodded and smiled and explained the mechanical correction carried out by enlisted personnel under duress. Under duress. That was their word for it. Not intelligence, not initiative, just pressure and panic. The visitors? Quiet, respectful, dressed in uniform just like us. I caught one of them looking at me. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he just gave me a look that said, "I see you." Not pity, not approval, just understanding. And then they moved on. No questions, no acknowledgement, just left me standing there like a story no one wanted to read out loud. After they left, Grant pulled me aside. "You'll be mentioned in the report," he said, like it was some kind of favor. "Do I get my wrench back with that?" I asked. He didn't answer. By nightfall, the whispers started again. Some said the ship was being evaluated for strategic vulnerabilities. Others said the intelligence boys were looking for patterns, and that my name had come up more than once. I wasn't scared. I was tired. Tired of being the smartest guy in the room and the lowest on the ladder. Tired of seeing good men silenced. tired of carrying a navy that didn't know how to carry me back. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move, and I knew exactly where to make it. This is the turning point. Everything you've waited for. It all breaks loose in the next chapter. Don't miss what happens when truth walks into the wrong room. They say a man's voice can fill a room. But on that morning, the room was already full before I said a word. Full of tension, full of paper, full of polished shoes and clipped syllables and quiet glances that said, "Don't speak unless asked." I'd been summoned, not invited. Summoned. Official envelope, unsigned. Time, location, no explanation. Command Review Committee, the 0930 hours. They had dressed it up like a routine procedure. But we both know there's nothing routine about being the only enlisted mechanic standing in a room full of brass. I showed up clean, pressed shirt, boots shined, no grease under the nails. Not for them, for me. Because if I was going to be spoken to like I didn't belong, I wanted them to see just how wrong they were from the moment I walked in. The room was cool, not temperature, tone. A long metal table with 3 men seated, 1 standing. Behind them, a corkboard with pinned-up schematics of the Enterprise. Not just the catapult system. Everything. Propulsion, radar arrays, gun turrets, as if the whole ship had been sliced open and laid bare. At the center sat Captain Harlan, Old Navy. Silver hair, iron shoulders, and the kind of voice that could quiet a boiler room without raising volume. I'd only seen him from a distance before. Speeches, inspections. Now he was looking at me like I was a blueprint with errors to correct. To his right, Lieutenant Grant, naturally. Same slick uniform, same stiff neck. His face didn't move, but his eyes did. Cold and methodical, like they were calculating risk. On the left was a new face, civilian clothes, dark suit, no insignia. He didn't introduce himself, just wrote something as I walked in and didn't look up. Petty Officer Mills, Harlan began, nodding without smiling. "Have a seat." I sat, quietly, straight back, no slouch. They wanted something to read off me. I gave them nothing. "This is a technical debriefing," the captain said, "regarding the unsanctioned maintenance carried out by you on the Enterprise's catapult system. No surprise there. We'll be reviewing the nature of your actions, the implications for protocol, and, if necessary, determining future placement." Future placement. Not career advancement. Not commendation. Just a polite way of saying, we're deciding whether you're a problem or not. Then the questions started. Grant went first. Did you or did you not, without command authorization, perform unscheduled maintenance on a high-pressure hydraulic system? Yes, sir. What qualifications authorized you to assess that system's integrity? My own, sir. That one raised an eyebrow. He leaned forward slightly. Your own? I trained in advanced systems at Charleston. I've worked the launch assemblies for 18 months. I've logged 600 hours under supervised inspections. And I've seen what happens when valves blow during launch. Grant shifted back, not pleased. But he didn't argue. The civilian spoke next. Voice like chalk. Why didn't you go through official repair channels? Because official channels signed off on a system that would have failed under load. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was trying to keep people alive. That last line hung in the air. Not loud, not dramatic. Just true. And it made them uncomfortable. Harlan turned a page in the file before him. We've reviewed reports from multiple departments. Some commend your skill, others criticize your discipline. You're described as precise but opinionated. I take pride in precision, I said, and the rest. I don't answer to opinions. I answer to performance. He closed the folder. Silence. Then the twist. Harlan leaned back. You're aware that, as of this week, the Office of Naval Intelligence has reviewed your work as part of their vulnerability assessment? Yes, sir. And that, based on your adjustments, several procedural recommendations are now being drafted for similar ships? I paused. Slowly. No, sir, I wasn't told that. He nodded. Grant didn't look pleased. The civilian kept writing. So let me get this straight. The same fix that got me reassigned to a dark, moldy cargo bay is now policy material. They didn't say it, but they didn't have to. Then came the curveball. We've been informed, Harlan continued, that Japanese evaluators, under strict supervision, found your correction not only effective but indicative of potential non-standard strategic thinking among lower enlisted personnel. That was the word. Non-standard. It was the Navy's way of saying too smart for his own good. They didn't know what to do with that. A black petty officer, unsanctioned repair, international recognition, but no stripe on the shoulder to justify it. That kind of logic broke their system. So what do you do when the file in front of you doesn't match the file in your head? You freeze. You stall. You try to reclassify it. That's when the real motive showed up. Grant closed his notepad. Petty Officer Mills, he said, voice suddenly polite. Would you be open to a non-disclosure reassignment? I blinked. A what? The civilian finally looked up. A private posting, he said, with access to advanced systems. In exchange, this incident and all related documents would be sealed. They wanted me gone, but quietly, tucked away. No paper trail, no promotion, just moved. Not punished, not rewarded, just erased. I took a breath. Long, slow, not to think. I already knew my answer. I just wanted to make sure they heard it right the first time. No, sir, I said. I'm not interested in disappearing. Harlan's lips tightened. Then what are you interested in, Mills? I looked him dead in the eye. I want to finish what I started. I want a wrench. I want the engine room. I want to work, not hide. He didn't respond. Grant looked down. The civilian scribbled something in sharp, fast strokes. Then the meeting ended. No handshake. No warning. No next steps. I walked out the same way I came in, under my own power. But I knew the ground had shifted. They weren't just watching me now. They were deciding what I meant. Was I a threat? A liability? A fluke? Or worse, an example? And the Navy doesn't like examples, especially the kind that can't be explained with rank. The fallout is just beginning. Stay with it, because what happens next, it's not in any handbook. They gave me my wrench back. Not in some ceremony, not with a handshake, and sure as anything, not with an apology. Just a quiet change in the duty roster, a clip notice on the board outside the engine room. Petty Officer F. Mills, reassigned to Main Machinery Division. Effective immediately. No words, no smile. Just ink on paper. The Navy's way of saying we need you again, but don't get comfortable. I showed up 15 minutes early that morning. No one said much. A few side glances. A few back already. Muttered like I'd just come back from a beach vacation. But I didn't come to make friends. I came to work. The kind of work that smells like sweat, diesel, and tension. Where the ship breathes under your feet, And if you listen long enough, you know when something's off before the gauges even twitch. First thing I noticed, the catapult room was spotless, cleaner than I'd ever seen it. Too clean. Someone had made it look perfect, like a crime scene that got wiped down just enough to confuse the investigator, but the numbers didn't lie. And machines, well, machines, remember. I did my inspection without fanfare. Rechecked the valves I'd fixed, double-checked pressure lines, recalibrated flow rates. No issues. Everything was working like I knew it would. But something was off. Not the system. The atmosphere. People were watching me, not openly. Just sideways. From across the room, through glass panels over shoulders. Like I was a guest in my own house. Or worse, like I was the experiment. Around noon, I got called up. Again. This time it wasn't to a hearing room. It was the briefing deck. Informal. Low ceilings. Chalkboard stained with ghost diagrams from last week's drills. And standing there, Chief Engineer Maddox. Maddox wasn't Navy-born. He came from the Merchant Marine. Made his way up, slow, steady. Word was, he respected skill more than rank. Didn't care where your daddy was from as long as your hands knew what a torque wrench was for. He didn't waste time. I read the file, he said. You know the systems better than half the lieutenants. I waited. It didn't sound like praise. But you've got a spotlight on you now, and the wrong people are staring into it. There it was. I'm not looking for a promotion, I said. Just the tools to do the job right. Maddox nodded, almost like he believed me. You'll get the tools, but keep your mouth tight. Too many reports are floating upstairs with your name on them. Intel, Command, even DC. I shrugged. Let 'em float. I'm not hiding from my work. He leaned in. I'm not telling you to hide. I'm telling you not to hand them the knife. That afternoon, I was back in the engine room. Steam hissed through the walls like breath through clenched teeth. My hands moved on instinct, adjusting, tightening, wiping, listening. The other guys in the room said little. Some nodded. A few didn't even make eye contact. Until Foster. He was younger, quiet, had a way of staring at gauges like they'd talk back if he just waited long enough. You really did it, he asked. I didn't look up. Did what? Saved the launch system. Heard you rewired it solo. I glanced over. His face wasn't mocking, just curious. I fixed what needed fixing, I said. Foster nodded slowly. Most of us would have just reported it and moved on. I tried that. Yeah, he muttered. I heard. That was all he said. But the next time I reached for a part, he passed it without asking. No big deal, just two hands doing the job. But it meant something. Later that week, we hit rough seas. Real rough. The kind that throws bolts loose and tests every weld you ever made. One of the auxiliary pumps started rattling. Maddox himself came down. Nobody panicked. That was the rule. But I saw it in their eyes. If this goes bad, we've got seconds to respond. I took point. Foster followed. We opened the panel, killed pressure, swapped out a jammed valve, realigned the housing. 5 minutes. That's all it took. But in those 5 minutes, the room shifted. Not just the equipment. The crew. When it was over, Maddox clapped me on the shoulder. Glad you're not in supply anymore. That night I sat alone in the lower hallway. Not because I was avoiding people. I just needed quiet. Real quiet to think. What had I actually earned? Not a rank, not recognition, just a little space, a little room to work. And in this system, that's the biggest victory a man like me could get. But I knew something else now. They weren't done. Not the officers, not command, not the ones with folders and orders and sealed envelopes. Because the fix I made, the one they tried to erase, had left a crack in the wall. And truth has a way of slipping through even the tightest seal. The 5th chapter changes the game. What happens when the system tries to patch a hole that was never theirs to control? Stick around. The fallout's far from over. There's a certain kind of quiet that hangs around the ship before a big movement. You don't hear orders, not directly, but you feel them. In the way everyone starts walking faster, speaking softer, checking the same bolts twice. It's a storm you can smell before it hits. That was the mood when it happened. Not a battle, not an alarm. A folder, a single manila folder left sitting on my workstation. No name, no instructions, just a whisper of a message. Someone wants you to see this. And I almost didn't open it. Not because I was scared, but because I already knew what would be inside. But I opened it. Inside were 5 typed pages. No header, no stamp. Just clean courier font and clipped language. It was the summary of the Navy's internal investigation. Into me. Into the catapult system repair. Into the unofficial review led by intelligence. Most of it was technical, dry, cold, like someone trying to file a crime without admitting one happened. Subject made unauthorized alterations to high-pressure launch system. Subject's actions prevented predicted system failure under load. Chain of command failed to document condition prior to intervention. Intelligence review supports functional correction, recommends standardization. And then the final line, recommends subject be reassigned with no formal record to avoid precedent. There it was, clear as day. They weren't trying to fix the system, they were trying to fix the story. I read it twice, slowly. Every word burned in my chest like old steel on the tongue. This wasn't just a record, it was a warning. You were right, and that's the problem. I slipped the pages back into the folder, sealed it up, and placed it under the bottom tray of my toolbox. I didn't report it. Not then. Not to Maddox, not to Foster, not to anyone. Because I needed to think. That night I sat on the stern deck, alone, watching the black water fold behind the ship like a ribbon disappearing into nothing. The sky was clear. Stars like nail heads punched into velvet. I was 26. On one of the most important ships in the Pacific. With a folder no one would admit existed, and a fix that had already saved lives. And yet, I was still being treated like an inconvenience wrapped in a uniform. I could have left it alone, could have done the job, played nice, disappeared into the gray. But the thing is, once you know something, you know it. And silence. Silence feels a lot like surrender. A few days later, we pulled into an isolated support port. Off the record. Supply run, they said. Rotation break. A skeleton crew stayed on board. Maddox gave us 48 hours to rest, rotate parts, and prep for the next stretch. That's when I made the call. There was a petty officer I knew on the Lexington. Jameson, older than me, smarter too. Trusted, real Navy but not bought and paid for. We had a system, old ham code. Not for secrets, just for staying honest. I passed him a message, just one line. They're burying a fix that saved men. I've got the folder. He didn't respond, didn't need to. The next morning, a radio tech I'd never met handed me a folded note. Copy it. Don't move it. You'll hear back. And that was it. Next morning, things shifted again. The Enterprise got visitors. No ceremony, no announcements. Just 3 men in plain jackets, clipboards in hand. They said they were from Naval Engineering Division, but their boots were too clean, and their eyes never left the walls. They weren't here for repairs. They were here for a containment job. They started asking questions, polite ones, quiet ones, about me. Foster warned me first. They asked Maddox about your repair logs. What did he say? Said you followed procedure. I raised an eyebrow. Foster shrugged. Close enough, anyway. Then came the request. One of the men stopped me in the corridor. Petty Officer Mills, may we see your notes on the catapult correction? I didn't take notes, I said. He smiled, a cold, practiced smile. You always work off memory? Sometimes I just fix what's broken. He nodded. Well, if anything does come to mind, we'd appreciate your cooperation. They left 3 hours later. Never found the folder, never asked about it directly, just circled around the subject like wolves testing a fence. But I knew then. They knew something, and they weren't here to help me. They were here to contain the idea that someone without a stripe or a desk had done something worth listening to. After they left, I went to Maddox. Put the folder on his desk. He didn't open it. Just stared. You want me to do something with that? He asked. No. I want you to know it exists. He nodded once, slow, like he was weighing every consequence in real time. Then I know. I stood there for a beat, then picked the folder back up, tucked it under my arm. He didn't stop me. That night I made a copy. Every page. Typed it again by hand, in quarters, under dim light, with every key echoing like a drum beat. Folded it tight, wrapped it in canvas, tucked it in a ration tin, sealed it under the floorboard of my footlocker. If they came for the original, fine. But the truth? It had a backup, and I wasn't alone anymore. You think that was bold? Wait until you see what happens when the crew starts asking questions of their own. Chapter 6 doesn't pull punches, and it doesn't back down. It started small, like all real things do. A question over lunch, a half-joke in the machine bay, a look that lasted 1 second too long between men who usually kept their eyes on their boots. Then came the question that changed the room. Why the hell is Mills still fixing things they said were already fixed? No one answered. Not out loud, but that question stuck, like grease under fingernails. No matter how much you scrubbed, it wouldn't come off. By then, the copy of the report had passed through 3 hands. I didn't pass it out like flyers. I wasn't out to start a rebellion. But when someone asks you straight, what really happened with the catapult? And they've got the kind of eyes that say they're not here to snitch or climb a ladder, just to know you don't lie. You don't hide. You give them what you've got. So I let it move, carefully, quietly, and before the end of that week, at least a dozen crewmen knew the truth. The real one, not the press release version they scribbled into some officer's notebook. That it was broken, that I fixed it, that they tried to make that fact disappear. Then one day, someone taped a hand-drawn sketch of the catapult valve system to the mess hall wall. Under it, in pencil, "Ask Mills how this really got fixed." I didn't put it there, didn't need to, but the second I saw it, I knew the crew had crossed a line. They weren't pretending anymore. They were listening. And once men start listening, the officers get nervous. Next morning, I was called into Maddox's office again. "You know what's going around?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eye. Yeah, the truth. He didn't argue, didn't threaten. He just leaned back in his chair like the weight of the ship was suddenly sitting on his spine. "This isn't just about a valve anymore," he said. "No," I said. "It's about what they do when someone without a stripe fixes something they ignored." He paused, then nodded. That's what I thought. That same afternoon, I got pulled into a crew-wide inspection. Everyone lined up. Boots polished, sleeves tight, faces straight. Standard. But this one had attention to it, like someone was measuring more than uniforms, measuring loyalty, measuring silence. Grant walked the line, still stiff, still sharp. When he got to me, he stopped. Too long. "Mills," he said. "Sir." He looked down at my wrench, then back at me. "Everything in working order?" "Everything I touch. Yes, sir." His jaw tightened. "Make sure it stays that way." Then he moved on. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, someone came into my berth while I was on watch. Didn't take anything. Didn't leave anything obvious. But I saw it. My footlocker, just slightly misaligned. The kind of misalignment only someone who checks it daily would notice. They were looking for the folder. Didn't find it because I didn't hide it there anymore. I had given the original to Jameson. The copy? That was now part of the ship, inside systems, hidden in layers. One page inside a toolkit in Engineering Room 4. Another folded behind a loose wall panel in Storage Bay B. Each one invisible unless you knew where to look. Each one waiting for the right hands to reach out and say, "Enough is enough." And the crew? They started to change, not with fists, not with protest, but with questions. They asked why our fixes weren't in the logs, why the official report never named anyone, why every time something went right, someone tried to write it down as a lucky accident. And eventually, the officers noticed. You can't run a ship on suspicion. You need trust. You need cohesion. And suddenly, the gap between the engine room and the command deck was louder than any drill. One morning, a new sign showed up outside the launch bay. Typed. Neat. Authorization required for access. No exceptions. That was new and unnecessary, because everyone already knew who had fixed that system, and no one else had touched it since. That week, 3 things happened fast. Davis was quietly reassigned off-ship. No explanation. One day he was here, the next his bunk was empty and his name wiped from the board. Maddox started logging everything in duplicate. One for command, one for himself. I was told to lead the maintenance team during a live trial. Official order, signed. Just like that, they put me at the front of the thing they once said I had no business touching. Not because they trusted me, but because they were running out of ways to not use me. So, I did it. Ran the drill, perfectly, not because I wanted to prove a point, but because that system mattered. Because those men on deck were my crew, even if half the Navy still didn't know what to make of me. And when it was done, no applause, no medals, just a nod from Maddox. And that was enough. But deep down we all knew something had cracked. Not the system, the silence around it, the fear. They tried to keep it neat, keep it under wraps. But the crew wasn't blind anymore, and once a man starts seeing, you can't put the blindfold back on. The final chapter isn't about revenge, it's about reckoning. Stick around to see how a quiet mechanic left a mark the whole ship had to carry. Let me tell you something about memory. Not the kind that sits in photo albums or gathers dust in footlockers. I'm talking about the memory of machines, of spaces, of men. The kind that lives in floorboards, inside steam lines, between the bolts someone over-tightened at 3 a.m. during battle prep. The Enterprise remembered everything. She remembered the way my hands moved across her launch valves when no one else would touch them. She remembered the burn marks on my cuffs after that first fix. She remembered the silence of officers who watched a man fix what they failed to acknowledge. And now she remembered the crew that saw it all unfold, and never looked at command the same way again. It started with a story. Mine. Whispered in pieces, then verified in parts, then confirmed, page by page, from that folder they said never existed. It never hit newspapers, never reached Washington. But the deck knew, the engine room knew, and that was enough. But command wasn't done. They don't like unresolved pages in the logbook. So they called for a full systems review. Again. Only this time it wasn't just technical. It was personal. A new officer boarded, Lieutenant Commander Rawls. Young, crisp. Moved like a man trying too hard to look relaxed. Said he was here to observe mechanical cohesion during live operations. That was his phrase. Translation: watch the crew, watch Mills. Rawls walked into the catapult bay like it was a showroom floor, took notes, asked questions, real polite. But too many questions landed in the same place. Who made this adjustment? Is this standard? When was this logged? Was this change approved? One afternoon he cornered Foster by the turbines. I heard Mills worked solo on this valve system back in October, he said. Foster just blinked. Sir, I wouldn't call it solo. The whole ship runs on cooperation. That didn't sit well. Rawls came for me next. Mills, he said, flipping through his clipboard. You've been referenced in multiple reports without formal recommendations. Curious. I didn't blink. I'm not here for recommendations. I'm here to keep the ship running. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You've certainly done that. But initiative, especially off the record, creates precedent. There it was again. That word. Precedent. See, it wasn't the act they feared, it was the idea that a man without rank, without a desk, without clearance, could make the right call before the system did. So Rawls did what officers like him always do. He tried to close the circle. 1 week later, I was reassigned again. Not to punishment, to promotion. Official letter, signature, stamp. Transferred to Fleet Training Command, Advanced Technical Instruction. Effective immediately. Sounds good, right? Looks like progress. Like they finally saw value. But I knew better. It was relocation dressed as recognition. A way to lift me just far enough away so no one else could follow the trail I'd left behind. They wanted me out of the engine room. Off the ship. Out of sight. Out of memory. But they forgot one thing. The Enterprise remembered. And so did the men. The night before transfer, I stood on the deck. Just me, and a sea that didn't care what name was on your uniform. One by one, crewmen passed. Not many words, just nods. A hand on the shoulder. A folded scrap of paper passed without explanation. One said, "Thank you." Another, "Don't let them change the story." The last, "We saw what you did. We won't forget." I boarded the transport at 0600, no ceremony, just Maddox waiting at the ramp. "You'll hate where they send you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "They don't want fire. They want form." He paused. "But they can't undo what you did here." He held out something. My old wrench. The one I first used on that busted valve weeks ago. "Carry this," he said. "It's not Navy-issued anymore, but it belongs with you." I took it, heavy in the hand. Familiar, solid, real. And as I stepped aboard, I realized something. They could move me, but they couldn't move the work. The fix stayed, the truth stayed, the crew stayed. And whether it made it to the top brass or not, the men who kept the ship alive knew where the credit belonged. History might not write about that wrench, or that folder, or the man who decided not to wait for permission. But the Enterprise, she remembered, every time those catapults fired without fail, Every time the system held, every time someone new walked into the room and asked, "Who first touched this?" that answer whispered back from the walls. This story didn't need medals. It needed memory. And now you've heard it. Some truths don't ride headlines. They ride steam, sweat, and the silence of men who never forgot.